And it's increasingly clear that we are witnessing a dangerous craze among children with mental health challenges rather than the liberation of the sexually oppressed.
Experts are linking transgender ideology to an elevated risk of violent radicalization because it imparts this polarizing worldview of like paranoia and rage.
I'm Stephanie Keith.
And I am Tara Manjekovic, and we are unapologetically outspoken.
Hey everyone, welcome to Weird Wednesday. So, Tara, when we had conservative Ant on the podcast, we were talking about trans youth, and he had mentioned, the mental illnesses as part of the community that aren't being addressed. And I've really been thinking about that a lot lately because, we've seen all over the news that there's been a lot of violence, a lot of planning of violence within the trans community. And I started doing some research on this because I wanted to see, what information was out there on the mental health outcomes of trans youth, and then where all this violence is coming from. And is this a pattern or is this just some crazy outlier? So I read an article in The Guardian on the high rates of suicide and mental illness in trans youth. And according to the Trevor Project, data from 34,000 queer and trans youth ages 13 to 24 showed alarmingly high rates of suicide attempts, depression, and anxiety across both liberal and conservative regions. So this study shows that the high suicide rates in a conservative state where there's actual like anti-trans legislation is nearly the same as super liberal states like California. So clearly, like, this doesn't really have to do with other people being accepting of it. It's a root problem within the individual. And Dr. Maisha Price, who is a director of research science at the Trevor Project, stated that, quote, one of the most notable findings from this data was that so many LGBTQ young people across every state are unable to access the mental health care that they want, end quote. And Tara, I agree with this because now what seems to happen is when a child says anything even remotely close to being trans or even just being depressed or uncomfortable in their body, instead of parents and teachers and school counselors considering that maybe there's a mental health issue going on that needs to be addressed appropriately, you have these adults instead confirming to the child that they are in fact different. And then they start feeding into the whole idea of the child needing to change everything about them, from their name to their identity and their body, in order to feel normal, which is absolutely absurd. And now when they do the right thing and they seek a psychologist, the psychologist has to give them gender affirming care or face the penalty of possibly losing their license.
Before you go on, I just want to comment on something that just popped into my head, and I was going to bring this up to you just in general, but fuck it, I'm just going to talk about it on the podcast. My mom listens to our show, and she listened to a couple of these episodes, and she told me something I never knew, which was that when I was a kid, like, I got boobs early, and I guess I was like very uncomfortable with it, and my mom took me to the doctor and had a conversation about, should we do a breast reduction? And I think I was like 12 or something. And the doctor was like, fuck no. Like, you will grow into them. And like, this is normal. And yeah, absolutely not. And I'm like so grateful for growing up in an era where doctors had sense and common sense and did the right thing. Because I guarantee you, if I was a kid today and my mom took me to the doctor and said I was uncomfortable with my body, they would probably want to go ahead with giving me breast reduction surgery at fucking 12.
Not even reduction. They would give you a fucking mastectomy in California, where you're from. And, I had a similar experience, and I think everyone does, because it's normal. It's normal to feel uncomfortable when you're going through puberty. hello, like this is a normal thing. And I was like one of the first ones to go through that as well. And I remember like wearing super baggy shirts, like trying to like hide it. And then like I got sick of all the drama with the girls in school. So I hung out with the boys. And like nowadays, yeah, they probably would have been like, oh, Stephanie thinks she's a boy. And
Yeah.
it's like, I'm so not like, I'm so feminine and like totally, I'm just so grateful that I did not grow up in that era. But you're absolutely right. Like, thank God you grew up in that time because you would not have boobs today.
Right. Yeah.
And so this was startling. Okay. This is from the American Psychiatry Association's official policy statement on treating ugh, I feel like I'm having so much trouble talking transgender and gender diverse youth. So, the American Psychiatric Association, number one, supports access to affirming and supportive treatment for trans and gender diverse youth and their families, including appropriate mental health services and, when indicated, puberty suppression and medical transition support. Number two, opposes all legislative and other governmental attempts to limit access to these services for trans and gender diverse youth or to sanction or criminalize the action of physicians and clinicians. So they are literally stating that they will go against the law. Like in these states where, there's laws that are being put in place to protect children from getting these like body mutilations. Here you have the American Psychiatry Association saying they're going to oppose that. So, yeah, Dr. Price, like I agree that these children are not getting adequate mental health care because it's the damn policy to jump straight to gender transitioning. And you have no one advocating for the health and safety of these kids. And now we have the US in the past few years, like going to the extreme. I mean, you hear about it all the time. And it's like they immediately are putting these kids on puberty blockers and then scheduling them for surgery. While you have the UK and other European countries that are actually taking a step back. So, according to an article by JP Green in heritage.org, quote, the UK, along with other European countries, started widespread use of puberty blockers and cross sex hormones for children identifying as transgender almost a decade before clinics opened in the US for the same purpose. So, with that extra decade of experience, European health officials have accumulated more evidence of the long term damage being done and have started to reverse course. The UK review, led by Dr. Hilary Cass, the former president of the Royal College of Pediatrics and Child Health, noted that the gender clinic staff have told us that they feel under pressure to adopt an unquestioning affirmative approach in which children's claims about gender dysphoria are not carefully examined and underlying mental health issues are not properly addressed before prescribing puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones. The review also expressed concern about the gross overrepresentation of girls and children on the autism spectrum being recommended for puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones. If the rise in prescribing these drugs were simply a matter of children feeling freer to express their true selves, rather than the result of social contagion and recruitment among vulnerable groups, then those treated would better reflect the broader population. And it's increasingly clear that we are witnessing a dangerous craze among children with mental health challenges rather than the liberation of the sexually oppressed. So it's no wonder that we're seeing these children grow up to have a lot of mental health problems. And we're seeing more and more violence coming from this community. So, Tara, listen to this viral clip that's been going around from a biological man that apparently is identifying as a woman, and you will be floored.
We have allies who are also arming up because this is a war you started. The old expression, you prod the bull long enough, you're going to get the horns. If you back a wild animal into a corner, they're going to become a dangerous animal. So if you want to die on that hill of yours of righteousness and moral majority, then you go right ahead. I dare you to try and stop me from going into a women's bathroom. It will be the last mistake you ever make. I dare you to try and stop a transgender woman in my presence from using the bathroom. it will be the last mistake you ever make. This is a call to action and a call to arms to everybody within the United States that are scared, worried, have children that are transgender, lesbian, bi, or gay. This is a call to action. You need to arm up. Plain and simple. Go out, buy a gun, learn how to use it efficiently, through and through, because the time to act is now. You need to protect yourself and you need to protect your fellow transgender brothers and sisters and theys and thems. You need to protect the rest of us in the LGBT community, as I'm going to do myself. I do not fear Christians. I do not fear conservatives. I do not fear evangelicals, and I do not fear Republicans. They just talk a big game. That's all they do. But heaven forbid you do something in my presence. You're going to know what fear actually feels like.
Like what? What the hell? Can you imagine if that were a Trump supporter, like saying everyone needs to arm themselves and just wait, like you say something to me and you're going to find out what fear is. It's like, seriously?
The FBI would have shown up in mass at their house
Right.
already.
And this is all over social media. It's not being censored. And it's like, I would love if this guy followed you into a bathroom because I'm sure you would tell him what's up. But it's like, this is exactly why biological men should not be allowed in women's restrooms. That fucking terrifies me that some nut job like that is going to go follow my daughter into a public restroom. And if she gets scared, what, he's going to pull out a gun and shoot her because she's telling him to get out of the bathroom? Like, what the fuck? It's bad enough that as women, we go through our whole life constantly on guard in public spaces for fear of being attacked. But now we got to deal with this bullshit of going to the bathroom and having some crazy ass person that's like armed, just waiting, just planning on violence because of their ideology. And then we have the 4 recent mass shootings that were all trans or non-binary shooters. So according to an article in Reuters, Alec McKinney of age 17 was sentenced to life in prison plus 38 years in Douglas County District Court for shooting at the Science, Technology, Engineering, and Math School in Highlands Ranch, Colorado. This was on May 7th of 2019, and it left 1 student dead and 8 others wounded. McKinney was born female and has been plotting the school shooting as a revenge on classmates over bullying, according to the arrest warrant affidavit. So McKinney and the other defendant, Erickson, consumed cocaine, stole 3 handguns and a rifle belonging to Erickson's parents, and then stormed the school, according to police. Then you have the recent Nashville shooting. And this shooter, we know, had a manifesto that the FBI is refusing to release. And you have our president, Biden, treating the shooter as a victim and the hero in this scenario after killing 6 innocent people, children. And then that same week, Biden celebrates Trans Awareness Day, which was originally planned to be a day of violence and retribution for the trans community. And there's a story that hits really close to home for me because it's in Hernando County, Florida. And it's this teacher who was threatening violence. So on March 24th, a school resource officer was called to investigate reports from the assistant principal, Carrie Thornton, and the guidance counselor, Kimberly Walby, who claimed that a teacher had made statements about harming themselves and potentially shooting students. So the sheriff's department opened up an investigation and conducted a home visit in which they confiscated his firearms and ammunition. But still, to the shock and dismay of the parents of the students at the school, the sheriff's office concluded that the teacher's comments did not pose an imminent threat and determined that no further action was needed, which is fucking bullshit. Because let me tell you something. At my daughter's school, there's a freaking lockdown drill every week. And these students that make these threats, even as a joke online, are expelled, no questions asked. But here they're letting, this teacher back in the classroom of the students he threatened to shoot. And you'd assume that anyone that's threatening bodily harm or death on students would immediately not only be fired, but be arrested. But that's only the case if the teacher in question were not part of this newly protected class of trans people. So, despite the outcry from parents at the school board meeting, the teacher is back in the classroom today. Or not today, but you know what I mean, teaching the same kids he threatened to shoot. So, Tara is an ex-police officer. Can you imagine letting someone like this back in the school who threatened the lives of their students?
Sadly, Stephanie, yes, I can. And that is why I am no longer a police officer. Like, there is zero accountability for criminals, and the justice system is a joke, but our mental health system is even worse. And we could do a 2-hour podcast on my experiences with the mental health system alone. So, yeah, these kids are not getting any of the care that they need. And you just mentioned that that teacher, her name is Ashley Rankowski. And she is a biological male identifying as a female. And according to the police report, the reason that she wanted to shoot these children, in addition to being triggered by posts on social media, she said one of the reasons she wanted to shoot students was because they weren't performing to their ability. So the school district, their mental health coordinator, Sandra Hurst, met with this teacher to conduct a threat assessment. And both Hurst and the assistant principal you mentioned earlier, which, by the way, this is a middle school with a bunch of fucking little children. And they, decided that she was not an immediate threat to the students, which blows my fucking mind. So because of that, she couldn't be involuntarily committed. But oh, hey, she agreed to surrender her firearms to the police. So apparently that makes things okay. Like, what the fuck? And what's even more alarming with this particular story is that parents didn't know anything about this from the school. They found out after seeing the story broke on the news 17 days after it happened. And some parents in the Hernando County chapter of Moms for Liberty started a petition alleging that this delay in notification was because the school was trying to cover it up and keep it from the parents. And the vice president of this chapter of Moms for Liberty did an interview with the Epic Times and stated, quote, "Until Lemons," that's the reporter, "exposed this in the press 17 days after it happened, parents were completely left in the dark. When we asked the district what happened, we got crickets. They wouldn't respond to anybody. That shows there was a cover-up in place. Parents are furious." So I guess a bunch of these parents went to the school board to demand answers. One parent called the school like a hot mess. Another said she was like baffled that a teacher who threatened to shoot students was allowed back in the school, and asked why the school board wasn't taking it seriously. And then one father told the school board it was clear they didn't care because there had been a prior incident like a few days beforehand where someone pulled a fire alarm at school and the parents were notified immediately. But it takes 2 fucking weeks for anyone to find out that a teacher threatened to shoot their fucking kids. Like, oh, that's weird, right? So, and then Stephanie, you mentioned the Nashville shooter, Athley Hale, who killed the 6 people and the 3 kids. And you mentioned Alec McKinney, the 16-year-old female in Colorado who identified as a male and was one of the murderers in that 2019 school shooting. And then a few weeks ago, there was another 19-year-old male identifying as a female who was arrested in Colorado for attempted murder after police found detailed plans in his house for multiple school shootings. And then just a few weeks ago, on April 9th, on Easter Sunday, there was the incident with the transgender dude who identified as female and was wearing a tiara and got into a cab in Portland and stabbed the cab driver to death for no apparent reason. And then back in September of 2018, a transgender named Snowchia Mosley, who was taking female hormones to transition, ended up killing 4 people in Aberdeen, Maryland. And then last November, there was that shooting at the nightclub in Colorado Springs where the non-binary person killed 5 people and injured 25 others. So clearly there's a lot of fucking violence happening recently that's involving the transgender community. And there's something seriously wrong here. Like, is it the hormones they're taking? Is it the brainwashing? Like, I read this very interesting article, and it was in the Epic Times, and it talked about how experts are linking transgender ideology to an elevated risk of violent radicalization because it imparts this polarizing worldview of like paranoia and rage. And you talked about transgender suicide rates at the beginning of this podcast. And this article referenced that recent surveys show that signs of psychological stress among transgender people are, quote, off the charts, with 30% of transgenders attempting suicide. And there's an emeritus professor of anthropology at McGill University named Philip Carl Saltzman, and he's dedicated like a good portion of his career to studying freedom and equality and transgender issues. And he's basically said that what you talked about earlier, how many people in the trans community have serious psychological problems, that a lot of them are autistic, and that a lot of them have deep depression. And in this article, he talked about the things you and I discuss frequently on this podcast, how kids are being groomed by teachers and social media to believe they're in the wrong body and do these gender affirming surgeries. And he said this push for fast tracking gender affirming policies is really about the radical narrative being pushed by the left that transgender and gender diverse people are fundamentally at odds with the people they refer to as cisgender, which is basically straight people. And he said, quote, "It's a neo-Marxist model that divides society into oppressors and victims and characterizes the victims as innocent and the oppressors as evil. So people who identify as victims feel justified in hating the category of people who are alleged to be their oppressors. For the adherents of the transgender ideology, cis heteronormativity is the enemy that wants to destroy them. This kind of worldview fuels resentment, opposition, hate, and potentially violence. It's a paranoid mindset in the sense that all of your troubles are the result of what other people do to you." And then this article also referred to a study that was conducted in 2018 where they interviewed a group of parents who were struggling with the fact that their kids were coming home and basically self-declaring themselves to be a different gender. And among the parents, they commonly reported that their children spoke with resentment or dismissiveness about, quote, cis people, like, straight people. And one parent commented, quote, "In general, cisgendered people are considered evil and unsupportive regardless of their actual views on the topic. To be heterosexual, comfortable with the gender you were assigned at birth, and non-minority places you in the most evil category with their transgender friends. Statement of opinions by the evil cisgendered population are considered phobic and discriminatory and are generally discounted as unenlightened." And then this article also referenced a man by the name of Thomas York, and he lectures on religion, violence, and ethics at the University of Toronto, and he has a doctorate in religious studies, and he basically compared the radicalization in the trans community to like that of the radicalization of Islam. And he stated, quote, "Though not religious per se, the trans ideology fits the functional definition of religion, meaning it serves the social function or psychological function of a religion for its followers. It has rituals, it has its own sense of good and evil, its own morality. Moreover, it shares the same characteristics as radical movements in religious traditions that bring about religious violence. After dialogue has been abandoned as a solution, violence is the next logical step. It's either they feel they're going to take too long or it's not going to work, that things are so wrong, and there has to be a purge of the old world order, a violent purge. They view themselves as a martyr and that they're defending marginalized community that they feel is under attack. They don't arise out of a vacuum. They are encouraged by a lot of people who themselves wouldn't personally engage in violence. The community might publicly disavow their violence, but privately condone it or sympathize with it. And frankly, speaking from myself now, I don't think the Biden administration is privately condoning everything. It's very obvious that they're fucking publicly supporting it. And this guy, Thomas York, was apparently like a super radical animal rights and environmental activist in his youth. And he talks about his own personal experiences of how like people reach this feeling of euphoria in being part of a movement like this. And so they lose their identity in it and they become empowered by the group mentality. And then there's also this pressure and fear of being kicked out if they don't conform or if they say the wrong thing. So they take it a step further and they conform even more hardcore. And then some people take it to the point of being like super activists, and they see their role as taking it to the next level, which, as we have seen, results in major violence. And he related, his experiences to the transgender ideology and said that, social media has basically amplified this for kids, and it's drawn them to this movement because it has such conviction. And so they like jump in with both feet and they get super hardcore about it. And then you mentioned earlier the Nashville Shooters Manifesto that has been very conveniently swept under the rug. Like, why is that being hidden from the public? And what about the toxicology report from the coroner's office? Why aren't we hearing about that either? Is it going to show like some high levels of testosterone or other, transition related drugs that are causing some kind of psychosis?
Yeah, and that's the thing. We don't know the long-term effects on any of these hormones that are being given to children. These are adult doses that are used to like castrate sex offenders. So we don't know what that does to the body of a child. So that, I mean, that's a really good point. And of course, they don't want to know. They're not going to look it up. They're going to brush it under the rug, like you said.
Yeah, and I guess like the police took like 20 journals, 5 laptops. Like, who the fuck has 5 laptops, especially a child? A suicide note and a bunch of other stuff from Audrey Hale's house. And I read that there was a Metro Nashville council member named Courtney Johnson, who told the New York Post that this manifesto was, quote, a blueprint on total destruction. And it was so detailed at the level of what she had planned. This document in the wrong person's hands would be astronomically dangerous. But then when she was pressed in the interview, she wouldn't elaborate on why this document would be dangerous to release to the public. And then, like, what about the protests at the Capitol, where these assemblymen and council members like turned the whole incident around to say, fuck the families of the murdered kids and adults. The victim is the transgender murderer. And then these fuckers get invited to the White House to meet with Biden.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, but they could invade the Capitol in Nashville, and that's great. But you have people walking in the Capitol in DC, and they're still in prison to this day for just walking around the Capitol, not even for being violent. Bullshit.
Yeah, exactly. And then what? Just a few days ago, like House Republicans voted to, ban transgender male to female athletes from women's sports, and the House Democrats, all of them unanimously voted against it, which means not one fucking Democrat in the House thinks that this is wrong. Like, we are seriously living in upside down world, and it's fucking disturbing.
Well, and it's a slap in the face to all the women who fought for Title IX. Like, if you would have told me when I was a kid that someday, like, they're going to get rid of Title IX and they're going to allow like men like in these women's sports, I would have been like, that's never going to happen. That would be going backwards. But no, here we are. They've completely thrown it out. And the Democratic Party, that was once the party that stood up for women's rights, won't stand up for any of these young women who had opportunities stolen from them. And not only that, the other issue that we're not talking about enough is that they're being put in really uncomfortable situations in locker rooms. I mean, why is that okay? Like, it's so wrong on so many different levels, and it's a shame. And if trans people want inclusion in sports, I'm all for that. But maybe they should start their own league and work their asses off to get it going, just like women had to do for generations, only to have some dude step in and take it all away. And Tara, you know how the left always throws around the word appropriation? Well, I looked up the definition. It's the action of taking something for one's own use, typically without the owner's permission. And that is exactly what's happening to women in sports. And look at what happened to Riley Gaines when speaking out at San Francisco State University this month. She's the one who tied with that transgender swimmer, Leah Thomas, who was like an entire foot taller than her, by the way, but she still tied him or her. Anyway, when she was done speaking at this university, a mob began attacking her, and she tweeted, quote, "I was extorted and held for ransom. The protesters demanded I pay them if I want to make it home safely. I missed my flight home because I was barricaded in a classroom. In those hours where I was stuck in the room, I could hear the protesters standing outside. They were screaming, they were chanting, they were yelling vulgar and profane and violent and vengeful things and continually threatening both myself and the campus police officers. I was held against my will," end quote. To make it worse, the university's response was not to apologize to Gaines, but rather to thank the students who participated peacefully. What a joke. Like, are you kidding me right now? And here is a clip from Riley Gaines, who went on a podcast and was just talking about her personal experience in dealing with violent threats from the left.
On the left inciting violence. Genuinely, it is. I can't recall one person in regards to this issue on the right who has incited violence. Yet I've seen emails from professors. I've gotten so many death threats and inciting or threatening messages warning me not to come here or else my life would be in danger. And of course, they're all from people on the left. People will say Michael Knowles, he incited violence and he called for the eradication of all trans individuals. He said from his own mouth, that's not what he's calling for. He's not denying that trans individuals exist. He's not denying that every human deserves their God-given rights. And so people, again, that's just reading the headlines and running with it. But in my experience this past year, like I said, it has been the left who is the extreme radical end of the bell curve here.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's just absolutely crazy to me that you have these people and their life is being threatened for simply speaking out about something that we all know is unfair and wrong. And everyone's just going along with it. It's like, what twilight zone are we living in where people are just like letting it happen? And it's really like making me um upset because I just think like what kind of world are we creating for the next generation? And I know like I'm not going to be one of these people that just sits quietly watching womanhood completely be erased. And I just urge that like everyone out there that is listening needs to start speaking up. And it's not going to get better. It's just going to get worse unless we can all start speaking up about these things that are very clearly wrong. And I just want to use this analogy real quick because I was thinking about this when I was reading, the mental health studies that are being done across Europe on these trans youth. And it's like the one doctor brought up this analogy and she said, if we have a patient, a young girl that comes in with anorexia, we don't tell her and affirm that, yeah, you're overweight and you need to lose weight and you need to change your body in order to fit in. We don't give her liposuction. We don't give her diet pills. We give her the help that she needs so she can heal. And we take the mental health approach and get her counseling. But yet you have kids coming in that are saying they're not comfortable in their body and they're affirming, yeah, you know what? You're right. You are in the wrong body. And now we're going to change everything about you. We're going to give you hormones that are going to change your life forever because now you're going to have to take medication for the rest of your life. Not only that, but they're damaging your organs and possibly making you violent if you're given too much of something. And then we're going to mutilate your body and then you'll fit in. I mean,
And
it's
good luck to
absolutely
you.
insane.
Yeah. We're
Yeah.
going to do this and then good luck to you for the rest of your life. And it's like, we are, as much as we can speak out and urge other people to speak out, unless there are serious fucking changes made to our healthcare system, especially our mental healthcare system and our fucking justice system that does not punish criminals for engaging in these violent acts, unless there are changes demanded of those two segments of society, we're fucked and it's never going to change. The bottom line is this is a mental health crisis and it is a criminal behavior crisis.
It's a human rights crisis. Like, I have no doubt that there will be a day where we're going to look back at this and view it as crimes against humanity, crimes against children. And I wouldn't be surprised if there will be a day where some of these parents and psychologists and doctors are held criminally liable. So everyone that's so pro for it right now, like I think that day is going to come, and just look at what's happening in Europe. Like they did this 10 years ago and they realized it's not good. The long-term results are actually really bad and they stopped it. And here we are just like running forward, ignoring every piece of evidence that's right in front of us. And it's just so sad because these kids will never be the same. And no one's advocating for them. So I hope that that just gives a little bit more insight on, what's going on, and I hope more people start standing up for these kids and getting them like the real help they need, which is not plastic surgery.
Yeah.
So that is Weird Wednesday, and we'll see you back here for our Freedom Friday episode. Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this episode, share it with a friend, and don't forget to subscribe to the podcast so you get our latest episodes every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And if you could, please rate and review the show. We are going to be reading every single review, and I would love it if you hopped over to Instagram at Unapologetically Outspoken and say hi. We want to see who's out there and start a conversation, plus get all of the topics that you want us to talk about next. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.